All right, welcome back to the Black Male Archives. I'm your host, Rodney Freeman, and we have with us John Clark. Is it Doctor Clark?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
Doctor Clark. Thank you for being with us. How you doing today, sir?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for having me.
Hey, no, thank you for being on here. This is really interesting about Black pharmacists, and didn't know about just how they established some of their own schools, and basically wrote the research on Black pharmacists. So I'm really glad that we have you on the podcast today, so we can talk to some of the listeners and just really learn the history of Black pharmacists in America. So but before we get into that, if you can tell them a little bit about your background and where you're from.
Yes. Hi. I'm John Clark. I'm currently at the University of South Florida College of Pharmacy in Tampa, Florida. So my role there is we have a dual things that we have to do there. One of them is serving as the assistant associate professor of pharmacy in the Department of Pharmacotherapeutics and Clinical Research. And I'm also the director of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm also the international affairs coordinator for the college, and I help coordinate all the continuing education programs for the college as well. So, and I have a clinical practice. I work in an ambulatory care center at the Morsani Health Center on the campus of the University of South Florida. I moved to Tampa from Miami, where I've been working as a clinical associate clinical director there for close to 20 years. I graduated from Wayne State University in Detroit with a master's degree in pharmaceutical administration. I have a bachelor's degree in pharmacy from Texas Southern University in Houston, Texas, and my doctorate degree in pharmacy from Florida A&M University. And I completed a residency training at the old Detroit General Hospital, which no longer exists anymore. When I say that, people say, "Where is that? I never heard of that." Because it's a parking lot now, empty lot now. But back in the day, it was one of those old black. No, it wasn't black. It was a city-run hospital, similar to Cook County and some of the other big, large cities in the country during the time. So Detroit was, and I loved the training that I had there because you just about saw everything that you could possibly see come through there.
Yeah, yeah, I bet.
So my big interest right now, I teach in healthcare administration, and we all have to declare some kind of research interest. And although I do research in clinical pharmacy practice areas, but my passion is really in Black pharmacy history. So that's where I find the biggest niche area for me that I know where I can launch some type of practice or research area where it can lead to a much bigger impact
Mhm.
personally for me than I see in the other areas. Most of the clinical pharmacy areas that you work in, especially when you're writing papers and researching, is extremely competitive. You
Mhm.
present it somewhere, you always got to debate somebody on what your findings are.
Yeah.
But when it comes to history, it's only I cannot think of very many people that are looking at Black pharmacy history. There may
Yeah.
be a few, and those that were have pretty much passed away. So there's not many of us out there. In fact, I only know of one other person besides myself.
Yeah, that's
And,
why
and
that's why I really wanted to talk to you, because this is a really small niche, but it's really important though. So what are some of the findings that you found out, and what was some of the information that you found out about Black pharmacy?
well, one of the things that really, let me tell you how I got started because that'll help me talk about what I found. I was sitting in my office one day, and this lady calls me from me and her have become close friends since that conversation. She calls me in my office because she was at the Touro University in New York, and someone had asked her there who was the first Black female pharmacist. And I'm busy working, not even thinking about stopping to try to help her out. But then that's not my personality. So I stopped what I was doing and said, "Wow, that's a very interesting question. And I don't know who that is." As we normally do, talking to someone, you sitting at your computer, you look on the internet. So I find this lady named Ella Phillips Stewart. and she graduated from the University of Pittsburgh in 19, I believe it was 1916. But it says in there that she's the first Black female pharmacist in America. And I thought 1916, that seems a little late for me. Then I keep looking, I find another Black woman named Anna Louise James, which was the only woman and only first Black woman to graduate from Brooklyn College of Pharmacy when it was existing back in 1908. So then I said, well, already I got a conflict here.
Yeah.
The internet is saying Ella Phillips Stewart at first, but I know for a fact is that Anna Louise James was almost 8 years ahead of her.
Right.
So then
Right.
I kept thinking, uh, I'm not even sure 1908 is correct.
Mm.
So I started looking and searching, and I had no idea, hadn't even considered. No one has ever taught me this. No one has ever brought it up in school that there were Black pharmacy schools before 1900. No one has
Mm.
ever. So I started looking, and I saw these names of schools, and I assumed by where I was looking in the literature that those were Black schools.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, this little my I started sweating. I got
Hmm.
this little energy fired up. I'm thinking, what? Are you kidding me? There were Black pharmacy schools during the Civil War? But that was not quite the truth about that, because they started right after the Civil War.
Okay.
But that was a shocking finding for me.
Yeah.
Shocking, because I absolutely had no idea. So I decided to ask a medical historian, and lo and behold, he knew about it. So it's a white guy who's a medical historian who writes on Black medical history,
Hmm.
and he said, "Oh, I knew about it because all the pharmacy schools were in the medical schools, so he knew about all the Black medical schools." So he
Hmm.
told me that was four, and I thought that just blew my mind. Four Black pharmacy schools? He said, "Yeah." He couldn't remember much more of the detail because he was not interested in that. He was interested in the Black medical schools.
Hmm.
But he fed my curiosity. So I give him a lot of credit for his name is Dr. Todd Savitt. He's since retired, but Dr. Savitt is an incredible historian when it comes to Black medicine. And so he told me about the schools. He said, because he knew about them, but he hadn't bothered to pursue it. So I went looking for the schools,
Yeah.
and I dug and I dug, and I ended up finding a total of seven of them. There were seven schools that
Hmm.
were formed between 1868 and 1926,
Okay.
1918, sorry. And that was a fascinating finding, something I didn't know. But then the little light went off in my head. I said, I go back to Dr. Williams, who had called me about this first Black woman, and I realized that if I'm going to find that first Black female, she was in the Black schools. She got to be in the Black schools. So now I gotta find out if I'm right. So,
Yeah.
but unfortunately, like what happened with our history, it gets lost and destroyed
Right.
and swept away. I
Right.
couldn't find any of the catalogs. So then I kept continuing to look through the National Library of Medicine, and
Hmm.
I was able to find catalogs on well, not full years of the time they were open, but I found some of the catalogs. So I was able to eventually find out who that lady was. I found her. And what
Yeah.
really got, the other exciting thing was that I always could find, I found the name, so I knew the name.
Yeah.
And what became exciting was one day I was looking for something else, and I saw a photo in an old Meharry Medical School um, annual report. And underneath the picture in there it says Matilda Lloyd. That's her name. I knew the name, and I said,
Mm.
"Oh my God!" I jumped up out of my seat. I actually found a picture of the lady. She was the first graduate with two other Black women. First time that ever happened.
Hmm.
Two Black women, three Black women in the same class in 1894. I
Hmm.
found a newspaper article from the newspaper archive app that had them recognized in the graduation ceremony as being the first Black women in America. So I'm pretty confident that I found it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
found it. Everybody asked me, "Are you sure?" Well, yeah, I'm pretty confident I got it. I called the archivist at Meharry, who almost looked at me like, "Are you? Somebody's telling you that's not true?" I'm like, "Well, I just want to make sure that people will question it. So
Yeah.
so I discovered that. That's just one of the many things. That was probably some of the first things that I identified that got me pretty excited. And since
Hmm.
that time, I'm constantly running into things that I didn't know, constantly seeing things. And so now I have a motto that I write in my when I sign my book. It says, "Our history is how we tell it." And that came from a historian. When I call him and say, "How do you write a history book and you're not a historian?" He
Hmm.
says, "You write it the way you see it."
Right.
And I'm thinking, so then I got it. Oh, but I also learned something else. Our history is not always told. It's not that
Mhm.
they're writing something that's inaccurate. They leave out so much things that.
Yeah.
So it's true that our history is how we tell it.
Right. And so why is this so important? This history specifically about black pharmacists. Why is this so important?
It's important because if you were to go and if you look at just broadly look at the history of black scientists or black healthcare people, you
Hmm.
will always find black physicians. They got tons of stuff written on black physicians. You will find things on black research scientists. You will find lots of things written on black nurses. Now I'm seeing things written on chemists and things of that sort, but you don't see anything like that level of interest in pharmacy. You just don't see it. So it's almost have been ignored, or just well, that's what it feels like. It may not have been ignored, but it certainly feels that way. So I chose to delve into it because I clearly can see that there is a need, there is a value to having that information. It is also important to highlight many of the things that led to black pharmacists being integrated into the profession now, and those things are oftentimes left out.
Hmm.
It just and still, the last 2 years I have been probably longer than that. I know in the last 2 years I've seen a lot of changes. If you were to Google Black pharmacy history, look at what pops up on the internet now. I do it all the time because I've seen it come up, and oftentimes you'll find items that I've posted in either little internet articles and maybe some interviews that I've done. They show up. Those things were not there 3 to 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I appreciate when people say I think what you're doing is making an impact, and I actually can see it. I
Yeah.
can actually see it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just wanted to catch on where everybody else doing because it's just not there. It's
Right.
not being done.
Right. What do you what why in and I know why pharmacy is important, but what does the general public need to know w- about pharmacy? Why? Because I think the only interactions that the general public have, or I don't say the only, but some majority of the interactions is when they go and get their prescriptions filled.
Right.
But why is it important to know about pharmacists? What is it important to know about their role and their function?
They play a vital part in the healthcare system. They are really part of that team, and I think there is a shift in the role of a pharmacist compared to what I think is ingrained into most people in the community's mind about a pharmacist. They think they're only going to fill a prescription.
Mm.
We got a prescription, we go there. They definitely don't think of you as being a doctor. They think of you as if you even got a doctor on your name. The first thing is, I get told it all the time. You're not the doctor, but I am Dr. Clark.
Hmm.
But they don't because I'm a pharmacist, and I get told that all the time. You are a pharmacist. You're not the doctor. But what they don't realize is that pharmacy has changed drastically. It's
Hmm.
changed while I'm sitting here looking at it changing right before my eyes. Uh, I don't even practice pharmacy in a pharmacy.
Hmm.
I got my own pharmacy clinic.
Mm.
Me and my students work a clinic with a group of medical teams. So I
Hmm.
don't, and every time I get a patient coming in there asking me about filling their prescriptions, I said, we don't have a pharmacy. And they look at me like, How could you be a pharmacist if you don't have a pharmacy? Where am
Mhm.
I going to get my medicines from? I said,
Yeah.
that's what we're going to do for you. We're going to figure that out. So we focus on, if you look at it broadly, we focus in several areas, and they don't look at it. We know that access to care is a problem. Well,
Mhm.
I always make that medicine on my as part of my role.
Mhm.
Access to medicine is
Mhm.
always a problem. So
Mhm.
we are a valuable sources in making sure they get access to medicine. So
Mhm.
when they come, like in my clinic, which is an underserved clinic where they
Mhm.
have no insurance, they have no most of the time no money to afford prescriptions. I have to make sure they have access to medicine because the doctor is going to write a prescription for your medicine.
Mhm.
So we run a program that has to make sure that we can figure out what medicine they can get for free, what medicine they can get on a discount. And last night I was in the clinic because we work at night. The clinic is open at night. So
Mhm.
last night I was there, and the doctor comes in to me and says, can you guys help us out with something? We got a patient here that can't get this medicine, and so we know that this is one of those indigent drugs that can be, it fits into an indigent drug program. Can you help us get this for that patient? So
Mhm.
we have to get the paperwork, get it all completed. Sometimes we have to get the social worker to help be involved because they have to declare that they don't have the money to afford it. And then we get the doctor in there with us. We can't write the prescription, so we can write it but have him sign it, and then
Mhm.
we get it sent to the manufacturer of the company and have it mailed directly to their home. So that's the access piece that we do. That's just
Yeah.
one example. The other
Yeah.
one is we try to assure adherence to medicines. So we
Mhm.
come in. I had one of my students there last night asking me, well, how do we measure adherence on a patient who don't take the medicine? I said, well, there's four ways to do it because the reason the question came up, most of the time that you measure that is inside a pharmacy. They got the computer set up. They can look and see whether they've been filling the medicine. If they haven't been getting it refilled, that means they must not be taking it. So
Yeah.
she's asking me, how do you do that? Do that, and we don't have a pharmacy. I said, well, we do it in two ways. There the most unreliable way to do it that we don't have is I'd ask them directly.
Yeah.
And how do you get data on it? We ask, well, how many times this month in the last 30 days that you did not take this medicine?
Mhm.
And they never get it right. At this point, we don't try to be accurate, and we ask the question in a sort of a multiple choice format. Do you take
Mhm.
it 1 to 2 times? You miss it 1 to 2 times a month, 2 to 3 times a month, 3 or 4 times, and we document that so we have some data. But we know it's unreliable because we don't have a pharmacy to check it. And so
Yeah.
then the other way is to tell them bring in the medicine, bring it in with you when you come in. We count the pills and see if they have the right pill count in there. And if they're missing some, if they got more than they have or then took too much, we know that they're not complying with medicines. So then the third thing we do is to try to maintain a continuity of care between the patient coming to see the pharmacist and their doctor. So we oftentimes identify something that the doctor may have missed, or the patient may not have shared it with the doctor. So then we try to make sure that we can share that information with the patient and with the doctor to make sure that patient stays on the treatment. We help with transitioning, so when they come from the hospital into the drugstore or into the seen by a pharmacist, we try to make sure that the site who sends them there have provided the prescriptions, the refills, follow up, and things like that. And the other things that we do that has to do with patient counseling, education, and being just a resource for them to call on the phone, to come by to see if they have questions about anything related to medicine. So we have
Yeah.
a very important role. We just now started working on spirituality and mental health.
Yeah.
We do spiritual. We just starting to do spirituality assessments
Yeah.
and to see how, because we know that those two things run hand in hand with how well they get better. So
Yeah.
they're not spiritual. We try to say, well, look, we know a few pastors. Maybe one may want to consider. We don't try to be a pastor. We just try to work hand in hand with the church
Yeah.
or whoever they choose. And many times, a lot of them don't have a spiritual level, but we know that the higher the spiritual level,
Mhm.
more likely they would deal with adversity related to their health. That's pretty much shown in research. And so we
Mhm.
try to encourage that now.
Yeah. This has really been an eye opener for me, just to learn about what pharmacists do. I kind of I can see the parallels, right? Because I'm a librarian, and a lot of people were like, well, all you do is just read all day and then check out books. No, we do a lot more than that. And here's the process, right? And so I see that. So when people read your book, what are some of the top notable things that you want them to take away from that? Like, what were some of the top finds that you found in doing your research?
There's a couple of things. The University of West Tennessee was a school that was started by Dr. Miles Link. He was one of the founders of the National Medical Association. He's a co-founder of that organization. He formed this joint University of West Tennessee. Has a medical school in it, dental school, pharmacy college, and he also had a law school. And right now, I was trying to determine how many females graduated from that school, from the College of Pharmacy at that school. And the records are not available. You can't find them. I found just, it was open for 23 years. I've only found 3 years of records, the 1906, 1909, and then 1923, which was the last year that it was open. And what I found the 1923 class photo, and in there you had the pharmacy school in the right corner, the medical school in the left corner. Underneath it, it had the nursing graduates, which was, I forgot to mention, they had a nursing school. They were listed underneath the lower line of the photo. So I barely could read. I saw one black woman in the pharmacy. They had 5 graduates that year, one black female there, and I barely could read her name. It was I think it was the initials, M.A. Lewis, I believe was her name, but I could barely read it. And Dr. Link's wife was in the center of the photo underneath his picture, his picture right in the center. And so I called one of my students who was in my office that day, and I said, Lisa, your eyes are better than mine. And I said, can you tell me what is the name underneath that the photo of that woman that's in the picture? And she says, it says Dean. I said, no, it doesn't. It doesn't say Dean. I can see that part. It says Dean. She said, no, it says Dean, Dr. Clark. I said, Dean? So then she points at the picture she's looking at, because we were looking at 2 different photos.
Yeah.
And I said, Lisa, I want to hug you, girl, because we just discovered the first black female dean in America of a health science school.
Wow.
And she's a pharmacist. She's a
Wow.
pharmacy trained. And so we didn't get the first female dean in pharmacy to the 1970s. I believe it was maybe 74. This was
Mhm.
1923. So do
Wow.
you know, and so then there's a question says dean, but it doesn't specifically say, this is one of the arguments I get into, debates I get into when I say she's the first black pharmacy dean. They said, well, it doesn't say that. And the catalogs are nowhere to be found to back it up. So now it raises a question. She was the dean at the College of Pharmacy, Medicine, and Dentistry.
Mhm.
So does that mean she was the dean of the whole health science school, or she's the dean of just the pharmacy college?
Mhm.
And you can't tell by the photo.
Right.
So that's one of the debates about it. Well, we
Yeah.
know she was the only 2 of them were teaching in the whole college. I can find that from the older catalogs,
Right.
and only 2 were doing that. So she obviously is could be the first dean in pharmacy, but you could also argue that she was dean of the whole medical school.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go with both. You know what that means? She's still number one.
Right.
She's still number one, because you know who's the first black female dean of a medical school now? It's
Mm.
Diana Ross's sister.
Really?
Yeah, Diana Ross's sister, the dean of an osteopathic medical school. She's a physician. She's written.
Wow.
It's all over the internet. She's the first black female dean of a of a health science school. Okay, now we got a now this little question they hit with me with. Her name is BB Stevens Links. BB Stevens Links is
Mhm.
either the first female dean of a medical health science school and possibly the first female dean of a college of pharmacy. I think she's both. I really
Mhm.
think she's both. But
Mhm.
what's even more important, women were not allowed to teach on medical school, health science schools faculty.
Mm.
And right now, we no one knows who the first black female professor at a health science school. It was one of them for sure was BB Stevens Lee. I got that documented pretty clearly. She was a full professor, taught in the pharmacy school, taught in the medical school in 1900. 1900.
Mhm.
I know there were no pharmacy professors. Oh, no, I was one lady from California who was on the faculty at the California State University when it was, the name may have changed now, but that was like 1898. She
Yeah.
was the first woman. So BB, when you look at black women,
Mhm.
BB Stevens Links is the first. Now that was a discovery that I've been trying to. I'm going to stick with it because I don't have no other evidence to show, and no one who people who question me cannot back that up that she's not.
So BB Stevens Links was the one in 1900, and then what's Diana Ross's sister's name?
I can't remember her name, and I forgot
Oh,
what year the year that she became dean, but it was way past.
she's
This was like
okay.
in the
So
1970s or 1980s.
okay,
So it's way past
yeah, yeah,
Stevens Link.
that's
And I forgot. I may have to Google her name. I forgot her name, but it's Donna Ross's sister.
okay.
Is
So
is a physician, and
wow, that
so
that is some history right there. That
yeah, and every time I share that, I haven't told that story too many times, but I definitely haven't published it. So
yeah,
but I definitely can show a case where BB Stevens Links was most likely the first woman who dean of a health science program.
that's man,
Yeah,
that's amazing. So okay, so last question before we get out of here because I'll keep you all day asking you about history questions, but
yeah.
I have to bring this up because um for me I am a librarian, and access to information is very extremely important to me. Um, your thoughts around what's going on now with, um, I say censorship. Where people are trying to say what Black history is and isn't. Um, what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on this censoring of Black history?
I find it very very disturbing actually that um, we have to we are finding ourselves questioning whether we should say things, we should even look up things, we should even. I teach a history lecture. I don't teach the whole course, but I teach a lecture in history, and I have to now start thinking, what can I say in the lecture
Mm,
that won't, especially in Florida, it could actually be considered illegal in Florida to say
yeah.
it. Well, the law hasn't passed yet, but chances are it will pass, and that it will become illegal of what you can say and not say in history, and that's I've already seen that if we don't provide the history, it won't get told. It won't.
Hmm.
People won't tell it. And
Yeah.
even when they come up with an alternative of what we should be teaching instead, it leaves out the history that we know or we want to be shared, and it feels almost like it's taking it away from you, where they want to keep it swept under the rug, so to speak.
Yeah.
I read an article dealing with the history of. I mean, I only mention this for as an example about the history of pharmacy in Alabama,
Hmm.
and I can't remember the title, but I have it somewhere on my computer. So I only looked it up because I was trying to determine the climate of pharmacy practice in Alabama during this time period, like in the early part of the 1800s. And as I'm reading it, a story of a man who owned a drugstore in a little town in Alabama, and he wrote a story that he had to close the pharmacy early that day because there was a trial going on that he thought it may lead to a riot, and he wanted to make sure he was at home and have his drugstore closed.
Mm-hmm.
That was end of it, end of story. So as I'm reading that, this is an example of how they don't want to tell the history. So I'm reading that article, and all of a sudden I'm saying, a riot in Alabama, like around 1918 or 1920. I'm thinking, what is he talking about? So that's my history research curiosity kicking in. So I put the article to the side, and I started looking at riots in Alabama during this time period,
Mm-hmm.
and I couldn't find it. Couldn't find it, and I kept thinking, what is he talking about? He closing the pharmacy that day because he's worried about a riot. Now, and I say that because why didn't, when they published that article, why didn't they tell us that story? You know what they were talking about? The Scottsboro boys trial that was going on in the town. You know, the boy, everybody knows the story of the Scottsboro boys.
Yeah.
That, that trial was going on, and they were about to sentence those boys to life in prison and probably do, I forgot what the sentence was, but they were about to sentence them in prison. He closed the pharmacy to thinking that there may be a disturbance behind the court decision. And I said, oh my gosh, why did he just put that in the article?
Yeah.
So that is a sign of what I think would happen with our history. So if we don't, if you put boundaries around what can be said, what can be told,
Mm-hmm.
it they're just things that we won't, especially the younger generation, they just won't know unless they have a certain level of curiosity to go try to find out for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's, I just don't find it. Um, I just find it disturbing that we are basically controlling what the narrative would be about our history.
About our history. Well, sir, I'm glad we have you to thank for shedding light on this part of our history, of all our history. And because like you see, finding doing your research just with black pharmacists can lead to other things, right? So I think it's important, and I'm glad you're doing the work, and I'm very honored that we had you on this podcast. Before we go, can you tell the listeners where they can find and um, get your book, and then find out other projects that you're working on?
Well, my book is on. You can get it online. It's in Apple, Kindle, and it's also can be ordered through Barnes and Nobles and also through Amazon. It's the title, "The Early Education of African American Pharmacists from 1870 to 1970." The dates are sort of only there because there are certain items that I have in there that were happened in the 70s, but that's where they can get it. So I'm working on a couple of things, a couple of more history projects. One is a second book on African American women in pharmacy. Feel like I'm a long way from getting it finished, but I'm also doing smaller articles on the early African American pharmacists who own sports. Uh, I wouldn't say franchises, but teams. So there are a number of number of old black professional baseball teams that were owned by pharmacists. One was the Memphis Red Sox, which was a championship team, was owned by the Martin brothers, J.B. Martin and his brother. J.B. was the pharmacist. His brother, one was a physician and one was a dentist. They owned the Memphis Red Sox. So I've been putting something together on that, along with the Cincinnati Mangrams, was owned by a black pharmacist from the University of Pittsburgh in the 1920s, and one out of the Iowa, forgot the name of the team, but it's a team in Iowa that was owned by a black pharmacist there. So I collected this information on black uh, pharmacists in sports. And I've written something on it, but it's for an internet publication. I really wanted to make it a little bit broader. I also started just recently put together something for Black History Month on the first black pharmacist in the state of Florida. I didn't know that I didn't know who they were. and I may have missed a few in that case because I couldn't find the information. I'm
Yeah.
looking at what I call women's regulation and laws. These are women who have are pharmacists who headed up the work with the Food and Drug Administration, other regulatory bodies like the Patent Office, as well as boards of pharmacy. And there's a lot more than I even knew was out there, going
Yeah.
all the way back to the early '60s, which I didn't know that they even
Yeah.
existed. And just the first Black professional pharmacy associations, I identified about four of those that were around before the 1940s
Yeah.
that I didn't know existed. So I got a bunch of projects. I got
Yeah.
so much stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know how I'm going to roll it out. I'll be working on it for the rest of my life, really.
Hey, well, keep going, and hey, since you have all these projects, we keep on bringing you back for interviews. Then,
Yeah, I just interviewed some guys. We call it we all heard of the Great Black Migration.
hmm
Well, we didn't know that Walgreens was built around the migration of Black pharmacists from the South. And so I've interviewed two of them already that are all retired. And I've been telling them, I don't know how, I got all these stories that I'm working on, and I can't get to that one. But that is a great story because
yeah,
Walgreens started out as a little small chain in Chicago, and
yeah,
they went into the South Side where most of the Black people were. They had to get Black pharmacists to go work there. So they was pulling them out of Florida A&M University, Texas Southern University,
yeah,
at Xavier. That's where they was coming from. So
yeah,
that led to a big migration right up into the '70s until that whole chain begins. What I can't show yet is how that affected the growth of the chain
yeah,
because at one point it became one of the largest chains in the country. So, but that was a Black migration of pharmacists coming out of the South going into Chicago to build a Walgreens brand up in that area, and it's
when well,
still there.
yeah, we'll definitely. Hey, yeah, I love that story. I'm originally from Chicago, so I
Yeah.
definitely had to get you back on here. Well, sir, Dr. John, man, this has been great. This has been an honor. I'm glad we got the chance to just do part one of this, and we're gonna have to do part two. But the Black Male Archives, where we capture, curate, and promote positive stories about Black men, which you are one of. Thank you, Dr. Clark, for doing this. John E. Clark. And the book is titled "Early Education of African American Pharmacists, 1870 to 1975." Thank you, sir, for being on the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Rodney.
All right.